Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ScreenFreeks Podcast. I am your host, Raph, and this is my friend and co-host, Andrew. Today, we're going to be starting our little show here, which we talk quite a lot about movies and TV shows, a lot of them being Marvel, Star Wars, DC, and whatever we ever decide to watch. So we decided to just throw on our cameras and, release it to the internet and have your guys' input in the comments so that maybe in the future we can get some of your guys' thoughts on some things as well. Today, we're going to start off with a controversial movie, a movie that I think is severely underrated, and one of my favorite Marvel movies of all time, and that being Iron Man 3. Andrew, do you want to tell us what Iron Man 3 is?
In Iron Man 3, we see the culmination of the Iron Man series. We see Tony Stark finally resolving some of that trauma that he's been experiencing through the past three movies, especially through the culmination in Avengers. We see his relationship with Pepper Potts finally coming to a good conclusion. We see um, Tony Stark finally taking the initiative, blowing up all of his Iron Man suits. And we see a good plot, a good villain arc with Killian, who believes he was unseen kind of at the start of the movie. And we see him create this false persona as the Mandarin, kind of going on a bit of a rampage to get revenge on Tony Stark and kind of the rest of the world as well, for just as I said, for him not being seen by anyone.
I think that's also something that's quite interesting as well because there was actually another character that was also again brought up in this movie as not being seen, and that was actually Yinsen. If you remember from the first Iron Man movie in the cave, we actually get to see that conference area that Yinsen was talking about in Iron Man 1. We get to see that in this movie. So I find it awesome to see that like this is a problem that's not just been happening in the recent years, that Tony has been doing this for like decades at this point, like almost his entire life, where he just kind of ignores everyone else and kind of thinks he's the best at everything. And I I think that's why I really like this movie. We this movie follows the Avengers, which takes place a year before, and I really like the Avengers in the Iron Man perspective of because he actually has to work with other people, and even in the Avengers, he's kind of like reluctant in a sense. And then he even has that fight with Chris. Oh my gosh, Chris Evans with Steve Rogers and Captain America about like who is the more like hero of them. And I find that Iron Man 3 is a movie that really discusses the flaws of Tony Stark, right? Like, in the Avengers, we see him flying through a wormhole to save New York City, right? Because they had sent a nuke, right? And that's something that had a lot of stress on him, right? And it was something that a normal person, right, if they go through loss, or maybe if they lost like a loved one or something like that, they'll bury themselves in their work. That's like a coping mechanism, right? Well, Tony Stark did that, but his work was the Iron Man suits, right? Just trying to improve on everything. You always hear that Tony Stark improves every single generation of his suit off of the flaw of the last one. And I think that starts with Iron Man 3 in a sense, right? I know it goes back to before, but it really starts with Iron Man 3. And I think that the movie might not have the best villain. I think it's a cool villain, right? With the kind of twist that the Mandarin, who we thought was the Mandarin, right, who was on TV, was actually just some actor who was being paid to be the Mandarin, right? And that Aldrich Killian was actually the guy all along. I think it was pretty decent. People didn't seem to like it. There were some better villains, yes, but I think that Iron Man 3 is not really about the villains. I think it's really about Tony Stark and him overcoming that fear, but also overcoming that ego inside of him that he's always had in him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just like what you're saying, we really see that Tony Stark is human. In so
Mhm.
many ways, superheroes kind of get out of touch. They're from some distant galaxy or born with some superpower. But here we see Tony Stark is a real authentic human being, obviously with billions and billions of dollars. So not everyone will be able to achieve that, but still human nonetheless. He comes with his
Mhm.
own flaws, and that's a good point. Throughout the whole series, we're seeing Iron Man work through each of these flaws, and even more that are, I guess, getting thrown at him, such as
Hmm.
the trauma and anxiety, PTSD that you're mentioning from Iron Man 1. So with Iron Man 3, sorry, with Avengers, all the um,
But
trauma.
he does face trauma in Iron Man 1, though, because if you remember in that movie, uh, Stark Industries started out as a weapons manufacturer, right? But then when he had to, with the box scraps in the cave and he escaped, he realized that the damage that these weapons were actually doing. So you're actually not far off by saying he has PTSD from that too, because in a sense he did, right? He was doing something and he realized that it's actually like harming the world and he wanted to stop that. I mean, you're not far off from that actually.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a good point. But yeah, also with the Avengers 1 playing the biggest role in the trauma related that we're seeing in Iron Man 3 and more or less his resolution to that.
Hmm. So going back to Avengers 1, I also think that another thing that's an issue is if you watch that movie, he talks about how his father like idolized Captain America, right? And he's being forced now to work with that person, right? And it's always been like we don't know that much about Tony's childhood, but at least up to this point, at least. But with that scene, you can see that because his father worked with Captain America or was on the super soldier serum like project, that he kind of does see him as like a symbol, and I guess he's trying to live up to that expectation, but he just can't, right? And now he's being forced to work with that person. Um, and I love the analogy. I know this is going past our point, and this is not really related to Iron Man 3, but I love how they prove each other wrong, right? Like, Iron Man says that Captain America's powers only came out of a bottle, right? And that he's the only reason why he's special is because of that. And then Captain America says that the only reason Tony is special is that he has the armor that he would never make the sacrifice play. Well, in Avengers Endgame, we find out that Captain America is worthy of Mjolnir, which means he's worthy and more than just a bottle. But also in Avengers Endgame, he does make the sacrifice play. He sacrifices himself for not just New York or the world, but for the entire universe at that. And I feel like that point of change, because it's not just Tony Stark just woke up one day and was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna prove Steve wrong," right, or change myself, right? It was a gradual start, and I purely believe that start happened at the end of Avengers 1 and at the beginning, and mostly in Iron Man 3, because I feel like without it, it would have made not much sense. But I also see why people find this movie confusing, because we find out in the post-credit scene of Iron Man 3 that he's talking to Bruce Banner, right? And he's like messing up in like in the beginning when the suits are all being exploded and stuff, right? In the beginning, and his mansion is being blown up. He's like, "Oh, I have to like restart." He's constantly starting over, right? So this movie is basically of the perspective of Tony Stark to Bruce Banner, right? So it might be that this is the version he wants us to see, right? And I like that point. Um, but this movie also does a lot of good as well with the story, right? Like with, like I said, with the, burying himself in the work, he made multiple suits to fix a lot of the issues, right? He has a suit that can travel space now, right? He has a suit that can carry, what is it, the Igor suit, right? That like carried the thing, right? Like the everyone thought it was the Hulkbuster, right? He has that suit now, right? He has a drone that can capture a missile midair so that he doesn't have to capture it himself, right? And you can see that, there's always the saying that Tony Stark like fixes what like his previous flaws, and that's you see that very clear in this movie, because all the flaws of Avengers he fixed in this one. And I've always loved that analogy, and I feel like you can't talk about Iron Man 3 and Iron Man 2 without talking about that middle point of the Avengers, because that is kind of a crucial point for his story.
Absolutely, absolutely. And definitely getting back to kind of his childhood and kind of what made him him. We see in Iron Man 2 where he really brings out that trauma from his childhood, where he felt alone himself. He felt like unloved, and I mean, his father was never really present. And we finally learn at the end that his dad did this all for him, and I mean, his father gave him everything he needed to know. So we do see some of that good good bonding, I guess that isn't present immediately,
Yeah.
but definitely need to note. So I've seen that
Hmm.
post credit scene, but that's a really interesting take. How
Hmm.
this whole movie is more or less a narration from
Hmm.
Stark to Banner. So
Hmm.
definitely taking that into consideration, a lot of the details could be um, or are being told through the eyes of Tony Stark.
Yeah. And I think for me, my favorite Star Wars, I know this is going off topic. Some of my favorite moments of Star Wars aren't the action scenes, right? Like, yes, the people swinging their lightsabers, it's cool, it's great. But the story that's being told and the character development is my favorite part, right? I love the Clone Wars era because you get to see so much of that character development, right? Especially with like Ahsoka and Anakin. I always watched Iron Man through that perspective, right? In Iron Man 3, you really get to see him grow, right? More than just like oh, here are the mistakes that Iron Man made. This is a movie of who's in charge. Is it Stark or is it Iron Man? Like, which one is which, right? Because at certain points, like, I remember, I don't know if you remember the scene where Tony Stark is having a nightmare and the Mark 42 comes and, like, almost attacks Pepper in a sense, right? And that's kind of a form of the Iron Man side taking up over, right, and protecting Stark, right? So it's almost like Iron Man and Tony Stark are two separate things in this movie. And I really like that. And I think it's very underrated because, yes, Tony Stark has to control the Iron Man suit. Well, up to this point with House Party Protocol. But I find it interesting that, like, the two are kind of intertwining with each other, right? Because while Iron Man was able to do it and he's overcoming it, Tony Stark kind of isn't. He's still, like, not able to process all these things, right? And I love the humane side of him, like, that we get to see more of that, right? And people are saying that, why would you just announce your address not only to the world but to, like, an active terrorist group, right? Well, it's because he wants to feel like he's something, right? Going back to that scene in Avengers, right, where he's like, oh, you're nothing without the suit, or that his dad idolized Captain America. He's trying to, like, prove that he is something too, that he is something like Steve Rogers. And I think that moment right there, yeah, it's kind of dumb. No one, neither of us would just give our address out to the public, but he wants to prove that he is, like, on the same level as Steve Rogers. So you get to see more aspects of it. It's not just like, oh, the dumb move. There's a reason why he made that dumb move, right? Would he have made that mistake again? Probably not. But the fact that he learned from his mistakes, that was a mistake that he did learn from. And especially putting Pepper in harm's way as well. I love the fact that you talk about Pepper and Tony, like, growing out their relationship, because he nearly killed the relationship, if you think about it, right? I mean, if he wasn't able to, like, pull the suit, she would have been dead, basically, right? Like, tons of, like, heavy rocks falling on you, you would not survive that. And I kind of feel like that moment there is when he realized that he messed up and that, like, he needs to change and, like, not be so egotistical, right? Because, you can't change the past, but you can change the future. And I feel like that moment there is when he realized that, yeah, this is kind of wrong. And I want to quickly get to the Mark 42 because I feel like the Mark 42 is also a third character in the movie. I feel like the three main characters, well, maybe four, are Iron Man himself, Tony Stark, the Mark 42, but also Jarvis in this movie. And I'll tell you guys that why in a second. I love that the Iron Man or the Mark 42 armor is kind of like the pinnacle. Like, it's called the Prodigy Son, right? But I like how it's so dysfunctional, right? Like, there was a point in the movie where the armor was so messed up it couldn't go down, like, he had to walk down a flight of stairs, right? Because it was just like he couldn't fly. And some people would be like, yeah, that's the worst suit. They say that it's a prototype, so come on, give him some slack. But also B, I like that it's failing because this is like he's trying to put everything he can into the suit. And when he's trying to, like, shoot a rocket, nope, rockets don't work. When he's trying to fly, nope, flight doesn't work. And I like and the reason why I say that Jarvis is the fourth main character, going back to the Mark 42, the scene where he crashes in Tennessee, right? He's, like, begging for Jarvis to, like, not leave him. And he's, like, actually sad when Jarvis leaves him, right? It almost just kind of it kind of feels like a void in him, right? That Jarvis is like more than just an AI. It's actually like a friend to him, right? A companion. And when he lost that, I feel like that was another character that was going away. And I feel like all of these components really go in, and I really like that the Mark 42 is kind of like a walking like L in a sense, right? Like it's just taking beating after beating after beating. But then I like that in the final scene, the way that they ultimately kill Aldrich Killian in a sense is by just blowing it up, right? And that's like again another major step is that blowing up the prodigy child is how they got like the not only the fix for Aldrich Killian, but it was also like the first step into him accepting that he is like he's not the suit, that he is the man in control, right? And I think that that's a big moment at the end of the movie, that it's not the suit that controls him, he controls the suit, and I think people really underestimate that.
Absolutely, yeah. All throughout the movie, we keep hearing Tony Stark say, "I am Iron Man." I mean, that's kind of his
Mhm.
catchphrase.
Yeah.
But that's such a good point where, I mean, they really are different in the fact that Tony Stark has all the um, PTSD and anxiety, and even the relationship that he's trying to hold with Pepper, let
Yes.
alone Stark Industries. Iron Man, especially the suits and Jarvis, don't really have that responsibility. So the fact that he so often tries to combine the two, I think really adds to more of that dysfunction that we see throughout the movie.
Hmm.
So
No, I agree.
at the very end, um, when Tony kind of makes that decision to blow it up or blow up all the suits, really, we see him really letting go of more of that personality. And like you brought up, I mean, it's totally fair to bring in Jarvis and Mark 42 um, into our character pool just because of how big a role they played. And when Tony can finally release that like second personality or alter ego of himself, that's when we really see his relationship with Pepper finally jump onto solid ground, and um, I mean we're able to see Tony Stark be Tony Stark.
Hmm. I agree, and I I feel like another reason why people don't like this movie is because a year later or 2 years later in Avengers: Age of Ultron, he's back wearing an Iron Man suit, and I think that that's a fair point, right? That like he's like, I'm not the suit, but then he still wears a suit, but he's not going to give up responsibility of that, and I feel like it's a little bit over hated in a sense. Like he's not just gonna magically like throw away the suit, right? Like, yeah, I'm no longer Iron Man. Like he's not gonna do that. But I think that he's trying to find more of a kind of like a work-life balance, right? Like that real life term. He's trying to split the Iron Man side versus the Tony Stark side. And I feel like in I know that throughout, I think in 2016 with Captain America, I know this is going away. We're seeing Tony Stark kind of like Tony Stark and Pepper on hold, right? Because he's back in the suit and he's doing all these things, right? And he's being Iron Man. But I think, at least from those movies, he's doing a better job at separating the Iron Man versus the Tony Stark. That, yeah, the thing with Pepper, that will always need work. But the fact that I think he's doing better, I think that stems from this movie, right? And I think it's saying something that, like, these are almost his children, if you think about it, right? Or, like his comfort, right? Like, everyone, when someone doesn't feel good, they go into like a comfort, right? Like some people might, like, when they don't feel good, they might, like, go up in bed and sleep all day, right? Or something like that, like almost like a depression. If you're like, when people have depression, they go through different things. I almost see this as that as well. Like he's not depressed, but he's going through something, and his way of coping with it was just embracing the Iron Man persona, which is not what Pepper wanted, right? And but the fact that Pepper, there's a fun point that I didn't bring up yet. In the final battle of the Aldrich Killian like fight scene, um, I think like the one of the Iron Man suits is locked onto Pepper Potts because of the extremis inside of her, and she punches through the middle, like the heart piece of the armor, and like slams it to the ground. Well, that's actually the Mark 8, which the Mark 7 was the armor that he used in Avengers 1, where he flew through the wormhole and he had to like stop the nuke and whatnot. So the Mark 8 is the first suit that he started working on, which, if you look on the grand scheme of things, it's the first suit that he really worked on to help cope with his PTSD, right? But the fact that it's Pepper going not only just through the armor, but going through the heart of it, shows that Tony is choosing Pepper over the Iron Man like persona, that he's like showing that, yeah, it's actually Tony being alive, not not Iron Man controlling his life. And I find that really nice that he chooses Pepper over the suits, and that's why he blows it up at the end as well.
It kind of like starts that whole chain reaction where she
Mm-hmm.
is getting rid, or not that she hasn't been there for Tony Stark in the past, but she really is taking a big step in destroying the first of all these coping mechanisms that Tony's kind of built up around him.
Mm-hmm.
And
And I like the whole. If you think about in chronological order of when they were blowing up, outside of when the suits were like just being destroyed by the soldiers, the Mark 42, he blows that up, right? Which is again the prodigy child, right? That was supposed to be like the best Iron Man armor that he's released up to that point. Um, he blows that up, and then immediately goes back to the first suit, the Mark 8, right? That started all of this. So he's blowing up his latest version of himself, right? Or the latest version of Iron Man. And then Pepper, the love of Tony's life, is blowing up the beginning of Iron Man, like the Iron Man PTSD with the Mark 8. And then they both kind of like lock eyes, and then Tony makes the decision to blow up all the armors. And that's just like a special moment, right? It's a humane decision, right? And I remember even like when this movie came out, I was like 6 or 7 or something like that, right? Even my 6 to 7 year old self knew that was what that moment meant, and it still feels like now people just don't appreciate that as much.
uh, at the end, we see or we hear Pepper Potts, I believe, saying, All right, and then what about all your distractions?"
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
I think that really clicks with Tony, especially where he realizes like, oh, I've really been building all this up as that cocoon, as that shield to um, help or cope, with whatever he's got going on there. So definitely the decision to blow up all the suits is a really big step and says a lot about him. And I think a good way to end the movie.
I think it is too. And I want to touch back on another theory that I have from the Iron Man 2. There is a question I want to ask you at the end, and I think you know what question that is. But um, we know that in the future, after Iron Man 3, Tony Stark's protege is Peter Parker, right? Spider-Man. Well, it was confirmed a couple of years ago that the kid in Iron Man 2 who he saves, the one where he's wearing the mask and he's wearing the repulsor and he's like, about to, pretend fight off the robot, but then Tony comes and saves him. That kid was actually Tom Holland Spider-Man, right? It was confirmed. So it makes me wonder, how did he know about him, right? How did he know? I like to think that he kept an eye on that version, that kid, right, and waiting for him to grow up. And that kind of sounds creepy, but like, I think it makes a little bit of sense, and it shows that he's trying to learn from the mistakes of not only him but also his father, right? Because if you think about it, going back to Iron Man 1 and 2 and a little bit of Avengers, we realize that he doesn't have that much of a connection with his father. But and while Peter Parker isn't actually Tony's kid, in a sense he is, right? And we all agree that they have a great relationship together. And I like to think that Tony not only learns from his mistakes, but his dad's mistake in how to actually like raise this kid, like, or raise him in the superhero sense, like, because he's already a teenager, doesn't need to be raised. But I think that he learned from that mistake there, and I think that's an underrated thing. Like, that theory might not be true, probably not. It's highly unlikely that he was keeping track of it, but I still like to think that because of Iron Man 1, 2, and then Avengers, that side of him that realizing, yeah, my dad was kind of crappy. Let me be better when I'm training this kid. And I think that's why their relationship was so good. And that's why he cared so much in Avengers Infinity War when he got snapped away, and why he was like so adamant about bringing him back. And I like that moment of in Avengers Endgame where he sees the picture of him and Spider-Man, or technically Peter Parker, of them smiling together, and that's like the reason why he wants to bring it back. But then you also look at a picture of his dad. He looks at a picture of him as well, thinking like, well, I don't want to be like him, and I really want to bring him back because I miss this kid. Let me like work on that, right? And I think all of that would not exist without the entire Iron Man franchise. And I'm including Avengers 1 into this because I feel like Avengers 1 is also like a little bit about Iron Man's like growth as well. And I think all of these 4 movies are really like shaping him into who he is in the later movies. And that's what it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to shape the characters, right? But I think that like, you compare it to like the Thor trilogy, right? Which, Thor 1 I thought was pretty good. Not the best, but not the worst. And then Thor 2 kind of sucked. There was no real character development. And then Thor 3 I think was good, but there wasn't really that much growth other than like not needing the hammer to use the powers and things like that. I think Iron Man 1 is the at least second best trilogy out of the Captain America, Tony Stark, and Thor trilogy. I think that Thor is the worst, and Iron Man beats this. But I do have a question for you. So a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this, and you had told me that you prefer Iron Man 2 over 3. Have I convinced you into saying that Iron Man 3 is at least better than Iron Man 2? Because I don't think it's better than the first one. I don't think any movie, like ever, will release or top Iron Man 1. But I think it goes Iron Man 1, 3, and then 2. And I know you disagree. What do you think now after rewatching it and having this discussion?
Yeah, Raph, I still am going to have to disagree with you there. I
Hmm.
still really enjoyed my rewatch of 2. Um,
Okay.
don't get me wrong, Iron Man 3 is definitely not a bad movie. I think with Iron Man 2, uh, we see a lot, at least a better plot. I think the cinematography and the writing is a bit better.
Yep.
We get scenes like the courtroom where Tony Stark is really defining and um, like taking a stand for his role as Iron Man. I like the villain arc a little bit more. Uh, we saw a partner of Tony's father, Howard Stark. Uh, he was corrupted by the lure of money, and
Mm,
Howard Stark ended up having him deported. So that can definitely create a lot of tension and hatred, especially when you're raising your son in the environment that we saw in Iron Man 2, more the depressed and um, poor neighborhood of Russia.
mhm.
And we got a glimpse of what seemed to be their house as well.
Yeah.
And we were watching um, Tony on television, on TV there.
Yep.
So they were constantly reminded of this is what you could have had. And then they're looking around like, but this is where we are. And I believe that's his father's dying words were, I
Mm,
can't leave
yep.
you any money or I can't leave you that, but all I can leave you
Mhm.
is with my knowledge.
Yep.
And we really see that come to fruition like throughout the entire second half of that movie,
Mhm.
where Vanko's genius coming through the entire second half of that movie.
Mhm.
So he definitely was on the same level as Tony Stark and could have had the same success had he been in that same um, class tier, if you will.
I I I like Iron Man 2. Don't get me wrong. I'm not here saying that it's like the worst movie of all time. I still think it's high up on the Marvel list. Like a lot of people don't like that movie. I just think that for me, I care more about the growth of Tony Stark more. Now, I will say that the villain arc I think is a lot better than a lot of the other Marvel movies. However, I would have liked it more if maybe instead of doing Iron Man 3 the way they did it, maybe they did like an Iron Man 3 if it like followed. I feel like the story was kind of just cut too short because I love the what you were saying about how his dad worked with Howard Stark and that like this is what you could have had. I like that story, but it was kind of just cut short. Like he just kind of went to jail immediately, and I wasn't like the biggest fan of that. And I also don't like the whole like how we see Justin Hammer kind of being like the bad guy in this movie, but like I'm not a fan. I'm not like the biggest fan of the Justin Hammer thing. I wouldn't lie. I would have preferred it if like maybe he was like he got the drone army by himself, right? Or maybe he like took over Justin's company in like a different way, not just being hired and then like kind of corrupting it from the inside, right? I think that would have made a lot more sense. I just don't like how they did Crimson Dynamo, and I don't like that they did Crimson Dynamo right after because in Iron Man 1 the villain is a guy in a big armor, right? In a big suit. The villain in Iron Man 2 is another guy in a big suit, but he just has, whips instead, right? And I found that the ending was like a little bit like the fact that I like that they used the lesson of like the Rhodey and Tony like used like the repulsor beams to make the big explosion. I really do like that, and I will say I think my favorite part about this, and I think that's the main issue with this movie, is I like the growth more of Rhodey than I do about Tony or Vanko, if that makes sense. Because like this is the movie where he obviously gets the war machine, right? But like he steals it from Tony, kind of like angry because like yeah, you're out of control, right? You're just having parties, being drunk, like you're not supposed to have that. Takes it to and like he wants to like serve the military and stuff, right? Then the suit gets hacked, and then like he's like, okay, yeah, I see like what you're trying to do, and maybe we could be sidekicks. And then Tony's like, no, I don't do sidekicks. But I just feel like the growth of Stark wasn't as good as Iron Man 3. Now, again, without Iron Man 2, some of the growth in Iron Man 3 would not be possible. So I still love that. Don't
Exactly.
get me wrong. But I like how in Iron Man 3, like, people will, flame the whole like Mandarin thing and how it was actually just all just killing and whatnot. At least it wasn't another big like guy in a suit like a giant armor, right? Like I love Crimson Dynamo in the comics, and like in Armored Adventures the Crimson Dynamo was really good. But yeah, no, I just think that in the movie having it back to back is kind of weird. Like that's almost like as if the next big Marvel villain is another person who wants to get the Infinity Stones and just like wipe half of everything, right? That's kind of how I see it, and I just don't think that would be as enjoyable. That being said, I still do appreciate it, and I still think it's probably in my top 10 Marvel movies of all time. Like all the Iron Man movies are in the top 10 movies or Marvel movies of all time for me personally. Just because I love it. And then I do have a question for you. One last question. Do you think we'll ever have a movie as good as Iron Man 1? In the Marvel universe, let me specify, not like outside of the Marvel universe, specifically in the MCU.
I'm gonna go out on a limb. I'm gonna say we have already. I'm gonna
You
say
think there's a better movie? Okay.
I'm gonna stand by putting Captain America first movie and Thor's first movie above Iron Man 1. My bold claim, going out on a limb, I'm sticking to it.
Okay, I can get by Captain America 1. I wouldn't. Captain America 1 is probably like second overall for me on my list, with the Iron Man being like number 1. But Thor being better than Iron Man, I think, is a bit of a stretch.
Oh yes,
Like,
yes. I mean, we get everything that we are seeing in Iron Man in Thor kind of in the one movie though, where
yeah.
Thor has been gifted some power.
Hmm.
If you want to relate it to the Iron Man series, that's the wealth and technology from Howard Stark.
Yep.
And we see kind of an abuse of this power very early on and very quickly.
Yes.
resulting in a banishment.
Hmm.
Now, any child, I mean, been disciplined or whatever, very relatable.
Yeah.
And we see a very complete 180 on Thor's time on Earth, and I think this leads to a really, really powerful character transformation. And obviously, behind the scenes, Thor is not only battling his own inner conflicts, but also his brother Loki, who
Yes.
above is working against him.
So
And
I am gonna be. I think you might not like what I say. One of the reasons why I love Thor so much, like the first Thor movie, isn't actually because of Thor. It's because of Loki.
that is agree. Yes,
I kind of like Thor is great. I love his kind of like I love how like when he comes to Earth. One of my favorite scenes as a kid was when he's drinking the cup of coffee in the diner and he's like another, right, and you get to see that like kind of Norse mythology like impact on it. I think that was great, but I think Loki was like the like way better. I like watching it now because I usually do like a yearly rewatch of the MCU movies. Every time I watch Thor, honestly, it's mostly just because of Loki, right? And now, especially seeing where he ended up in the end of Loki season 2, I think that personally, Loki is way better than I honestly prefer Loki over Iron Man at this point. Um, Loki is probably my favorite character, so that's being biased, but I think that Thor. So relating it back to Iron Man, the reason why I don't rate it over Iron Man is I guess it's being a little bit unfair, right? Like they couldn't really control this. But Iron Man started the MCU, right? Like it's what held up or it's what started the entire thing, which is still going now. I mean, you have to think about it. Marvel Studios was able to become its own like property thing now because of that movie, right? Like that started it, right? And I think that's something you can't just avoid. Now, again, Thor is that's a little bit unfair to Thor because it obviously came out a lot later. If they swap places, I'm pretty sure they might do the same. Um, but I also just think that story wise, like Thor's story was good, but again, the fact that I care more about the secondary character, right? Than the like I care more about the guy like again a main character. Loki is a main character, but I care more about the brother of the main character than I do actually about the main character. I think that's for me why like Captain America 1, I'm watching the movie for Steve Rogers. I'm not watching it for, Peggy or Bucky Barnes. I'm watching it for Steve Rogers, right? Iron Man, I'm watching it because I want to watch an Iron Man. I want to see him become like the suit. I want to see him escape the cave, all that stuff. I'm watching Thor. I kind of don't care about Thor. Like it's cool. I like seeing him, and he has a lot of great moments. But seeing Loki, like taking the throne of Asgard and like wanting to like be what Thor is in a sense, I think is why I like it. But that's why I rate it the least out of all the Thor movies, or out of all the three, like the kind of Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, is because of that. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but that's just me.
oh no, I see what you're saying. Loki is a very, very fun character to watch.
Yeah.
Obviously, he has a lot of inner turmoil himself as well. Kind of that adopted son that's trying to make a name for himself.
Yeah.
So throughout that movie, obviously he's going to have to deal with that, but he doesn't deal with that in Thor 1. He's
Hmm.
riding that out.
Hmm.
So from that aspect, he's not really dealing with a whole lot. He's really more like going with the flow and kind of chasing his dreams, if you will, while Thor is really having to struggle with his inner demons, more or less.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. I do like the story of Thor. Don't get me wrong, but I just think that Captain America 1 and Iron Man 1 are just far better in not in every way, but like I think they just have more of an impact on me than Thor did. Um, I also just think like when I think of like Captain America or Iron Man, I don't think of just the movies alone. I also think of them as the trilogy, right? And I kind of hated the Thor trilogy, right? Like I know Thor Ragnarok was great and it was awesome, but he kind of just became a goofball out of nowhere.
Uh,
Which you compare Thor 1 versus Thor 3, and it's like, I know that they're supposed to be a different character, right? Like, you can say that, like, Tony Stark was egotistical and whatever, and in Iron Man 3 he's not, which, like, you can still kind of feel like the Iron Man 1 Tony Stark in Iron Man 3 at least. Thor, it's literally a completely different character at that point. Like, they just made it a comedy, which, I mean, paid off. It was great, but they didn't do that from the beginning, and it was, Thor 1 was kind of a very serious, like, you're getting to know the character. And by Thor 3, it's like he's making jokes every 5 seconds, right? And I just feel like, and then there's Thor 2, which is like,
We don't talk about that one.
we don't talk about it, right? But like it's not consistent in a sense, right? Like Thor 1 is pretty good, I like to think. Thor 3 is pretty good, and then Thor 2 is like honestly so bad. For me, it drags the entire trilogy down by like a lot, right? Like it is like so garbage. Like I always skip that movie when I do my yearly rewatch. I don't watch that movie because it contributes to nothing. But it contributes to nothing except for that the ether effect, or the ether like liquid thing that came back in Avengers Endgame. That's the only thing it contributes to the entire movie, right? I just don't really like it. And I feel like for me, I think I can't not say that Iron Man 1 is the best Marvel movie of all time, because I mean, I know I keep bringing this up, and it's unfair to say this, but it started it all, man. It's like, you can't say that it doesn't have that big of an impact when, like, it was like, without it, where would we be? Like, I don't even know where we would be, right? Because, like, we did have like the X-Men and the Spider-Man films and the Fantastic Four before that, but like now we have a cinematic universe. But like, where would we be without this? Like, would we have a cinematic universe, or like where would we be? Like, would it just be a bunch of like individual universes like the X-Men, Spider-Man, and Fantastic Four movies were? So it's like, I don't really know. And I think for me, that's a big reason, and that's probably bias. I'm most likely very biased about that. Don't get me wrong, but being the first, I think I think it's nothing can ever beat that for me, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Definitely the sense of nostalgia there, and kind of what gets everything else off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, going back to Iron Man 3, in comparison to number 2, so would you say that with Iron Man 2, when we saw Tony kind of hitting his lowest point in 2, that helped Iron Man 3?
Definitely, yes. I would describe Tony Stark's character as learning from his mistakes, right? And I feel like in Iron Man, like, we start off Iron Man 2 with him jumping out of a plane drunk, right? And whatnot. And throughout the entire movie, the whole thing really is that, like, he's being poisoned, right? And he has to like fix it. And the way he has to do that is like, listen to his dad, right? Which, he doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to listen to his dad because his dad was always right in his mind. And he's like, oh, why do I want to listen to him? And then sure enough, he did have the solution, right? He like had the fix to it, right? And created a whole new element at that, right? So definitely, without like if you took Iron Man 2 out of existence, Iron Man 3 would feel out of place, definitely. But I don't know. I think story-wise, Iron Man 2 is below Iron Man 3. I still believe that. But I'm not denying the impact that Iron Man 2 had, because it had a big impact on a lot, right? Again, I think the biggest impact that it had, not even Iron Man 3. I think it had more of an impact on his relationship with Spider-Man and Peter Parker later than it did like Iron Man 3. So to your question, maybe, I don't know, like, it definitely had an impact on Iron Man 3, but I think Iron Man 2 had a much bigger impact on the, like, Spider-Man Homecoming, with like that relationship there where, like, Tony Stark's being like taking away the suit, and he has to like prove he's worthy and stuff like that, right? And like even then he's still making the mistake of not trusting, the person, right? Because that was his mistake in Iron Man well, technically in like the 90s in Iron Man 1. So before Iron Man 1, that was his mistake in Iron Man 3. Like he didn't trust Aldrich Killian, right? And at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, he's like, "Oh yeah, you were right. Sorry." And then like tries to do like the tour. And he still like didn't make that, like he's still making that mistake. But a lot of that relationship, I think, would be a lot different if, again, you took out Iron Man 2. I feel like it has a much bigger impact than a lot of people think, right? Especially on Iron Man. So I still can't say it's better than Iron Man 3. I think I'm always going to go Iron Man 3 over Iron Man 2. But Iron Man 2 is still really good in that aspect.
Okay, okay. And a question I'll pose to you. So in Iron Man 2, we saw obviously Tony rediscover that element and it
Mm-hmm.
cures him.
Yep.
How would you think Tony Stark's general attitude and demeanor would be different if that cure like wasn't found? He still discovered his, I guess, his father's passion and love for him, but I guess he was still suffering from that blood toxicity. It wasn't going to kill him immediately, but I mean, it was still present in his mind. Do you think that had a big impact um,
I
on
think
his
that's why
turnaround at
he
all?
was I think that's why he was acting the way he was in Iron Man 2 in the beginning, right? Like I pointed out, he jumped out of a plane in the suit whilst drunk, right? And then he had that big party that resulted in the Tony Stark and Rhodey fight, right? Um like he's kind of making decisions. I almost think that maybe if he didn't find the cure. So that's actually an interesting question, cuz I feel like thinking about it now, a lot of what it was maybe he didn't know if he was going to live, right? If he was going to survive. And so I feel like the reason why he was acting like almost in the sense of like, yeah, if you know you're gonna die, are you gonna do everything that you've ever wanted to do, right? And he's kind of acting like that, right? Where like he doesn't know if he's gonna die, so he wants to just do what he wants to do, right? Like he wants to like live life to the fullest. Um, I think if he kept going on that path, it would be much different, right? He wouldn't I don't think he would have made the sacrifice play. Um, or maybe not that late because that was like multiple decades later. But I don't think he would have sacrificed all of his armors the way he did. I don't think he would have. Honestly, I don't think he would have even made the sacrifice play in Avengers 1, right? Like that took place like 2 years after. I don't think he would have even done that. Um, and that's actually I've never been asked that question or even thought of that. Like, but I don't know. Um,
I'd probably say he would have made that sacrifice in Avengers. And obviously, all this stems from, I think, that conversation he had with Agent Romanoff in his room right before that
mm,
party. Because he
yeah.
poses the question to her, hypothetically, if this could be your last birthday ever, what would you do? And her response is, like, I would do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that's fair. Yeah.
so maybe, I guess, yeah, maybe he might have taken that bomb in Avengers. Um, I don't think we would have seen a lot of the events play out as they did in Iron Man 3, though.
Nope. I don't think
Um,
so. I agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, I
I
think
think
he'd still be holding on to all his attachments, all the suits, for sure, obviously, because that is his almost security blanket in a way.
yeah.
Um, and we see his passion for building those, so just to let them all go just wouldn't seem to jive with me.
Yeah. I don't think he would have either. I don't think he would have been able to I don't think he would have chosen Pepper over the suits, right? Which is like what we were saying in the beginning. I don't think he would have made that decision. And that's why I'm saying Iron Man 2, like when I see people rating it and they say that it's like, the worst Iron Man movie of the trilogy, I don't think that it's the worst movie of the trilogy. I don't think that it's any worse than Iron Man 3. Honestly, if I could rate them, it would be like number 1 Iron Man and then 2 would just be tied for 2 and 3, honestly. Thinking about it now. Um Again, the reason why Iron Man would be 1 is because of the, cultural impact it has in our world, so that can't ever change for me. But like thinking about it now, like thinking like I've never like sat down like this and thought about Tony Stark learning about like trying to be better than his dad in Iron Man 2 helped him with a relationship later with Peter Parker, right? And now you're saying like this. I don't think like Iron Man 2 has such a big impact, and I don't think a lot of people get that. And I think part of the reason why I'm changing my answer to they're both tied for second is because they kind of play off of each other, right? And I guess technically Avengers won in a sense, right? And I really feel like if you plucked Iron Man 2 out of existence, it would mess everything up. If you plucked like Thor 2 out of existence, I don't think anything would change, except like we would actually like the Thor movies more. I don't like. I feel like it does have a big impact, and people just don't understand it. And I'm hoping that this helps them understand as well. Like if you were a big Iron Man 3 hater or Iron Man 2 hater at that, I hope that this video like we help you understand why we love these movies so much, and why we think that they're really underappreciated. Because they don't deserve the hate that they get. I don't think so. Like I think that they are good in their respective ways. And they each bring something to not only like the table but the entire MCU as we know it. And I think people need to like understand that more.
Well, absolutely. On a slightly different topic, what about any Easter eggs or references, G1, did we find in Iron Man 3? I think one of my favorite ones that we only saw be fulfilled in, I believe it was Infinity War or Endgame, where we hear Tony say, "Initiate barn door protocol," and that's the puts the entire facility in lockdown mode.
Oh yes.
And I believe that
Ah,
comes from this movie, Iron Man 3, where all of his suit or his suit is in the barn. So the
yeah.
barn is keeping the good or preventing the good from escaping.
Hmm.
And obviously, the lockdown protocol was stopping the, I guess, Avengers' actions from permeating into the outside world there.
Hmm. Um, I think I was gonna say the barn door reference, but for something else actually. Um, if you remember in what was it, Infinity War, I believe, where he's flying up and he's like, activate suit 17A, right? And then it flies up, right? I think that's because of the way that it was stuck, like because of all the loose parts were stuck in the thing. Having one pod that can like go over it, I think is a lot of like makes a lot of sense. Now, I do on the topic of the Spider-Man pod. I want to talk about this before we end off. Do you prefer the nanotech suits or the old school kind of bulkier suits? Because I'm kind of curious because I think that I don't know if my answer is really like controversial, but it might be. So I want to get your thoughts.
I'm going to start off by saying I think my favorite suit is the Mark IV. Now, don't get me wrong, the nano suits, and every time he suits up with that, I always that one scene. I think it's in the Winter Soldier when Bucky is running through what looks like a mall courtyard or food court or something,
Oh yeah,
and
in Civil War, yes, yes,
Stark like
yes. He
taps his
does like
watch, and
yeah,
yes, oh that scene
that's
just
cool.
is ingrained, has free real estate.
Yes,
Um, but yeah, I grew up. I grew up with the OG, those I guess 1 through 42, and um,
mm,
so yeah, that Mark IV is definitely my favorite. I love that color combo. I think
yes. Mhm.
we get the most action out of that. The Mark 42 is cool, but I mean, we only ever see the prototype. So if we could
Yeah.
see that
Mhm.
in full action, maybe there's something there. But yeah,
I
I'd have
think
to
for
stick
me,
probably with the OG.
my favorite suit. Um, I don't really have a favorite. I kind of just have like three. I can't ever just say one. I have to say three. Um, number one, Mark 42, because of the reasons why. I think like that it's actually a character in Iron Man 3 and not just like a suit. So I've already talked about that, so it should be obvious. Number two, I am gonna say the Mark 7. I think for me, peak design is the Mark 7. I don't know if you remember, that's where he gets like thrown out of the building and he's like the pod like shapes out and like goes over him and then he like catches himself before flying. But that's also one of his bulkier suits, but it looks like it would hold a lot of firepower. And you do, because like there's the on his shoulders here, he has a little like mini missiles that come out, and then on the side of himself too, he has like missiles there too. I love the bulkiness of it, and I think that it is a really I don't, it's not underrated, but I think it's like one of my favorites. And then my third favorite, purely for looks, there's nothing really that special about it besides like the vibranium thing, is the Silver Centurion. I wish we got more of just the red and silver accents. I love that more. I would say the Mark V if we got more screen time with it, but we didn't really get much of it. It kind of just got destroyed. But if so, I wish we got more of it. Like, I know that the red and gold are the classic colors, and I will always love that. But something about seeing like the red and silver, like I love that. And I think the Silver Centurion was really good. And it did have that vibranium claw that cut off Killian's hands in the end. So it was also kind of nice.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Then another Easter egg that kind of adds to your point there. I think in Iron Man 3 we see there's a fireplace scene where um, Tony Stark, Pepper Potts, and the botanist with Harley, I believe her name was. They're all
No, that was the kid. I forget her name though, yeah. But yeah.
um,
Trust me, I don't know her name either. I call her Black Hair Girl. I know who you're talking about though. Yeah.
So, anyways, yeah, they're in the living room, in obviously Tony Stark's house, and there's three Christmas stockings. There's one for Tony, one for Pepper Potts, and on the far end, there's one for Jarvis.
Yes.
So
Oh my gosh, I love that.
that's so awesome to see, and definitely adds to
Hmm.
your points, like um, how Jarvis kind of is that character.
Yep.
I mean, Tony Stark really recognizes Jarvis as maybe someone different in a way that helps him.
Hmm. It's like a buddy that's always there, someone that can't leave because it's Jar. And I think going back to what I said earlier, in Iron Man 3 when he crashes in Tennessee, and the suit is like powering down, and he's like wanting Jarvis to go away. I think that's because for the first time he doesn't have a friend, right? Like he's kind of alone, right? Since at least the kidnapping in Iron Man 1, at least, right? Where like he one of his best friends, and I mean, you have to consider Jarvis has been there since the beginning of the Mark One, right, or technically Mark Two, I guess you could say. Has been there through the battle of, or the battle with Ironmonger. Been there with the battle of the I don't know what the army is called, the robot army in Iron Man 2. Been there through that. Been there especially through the Loki attack on the Battle of Earth, where his big trauma came from, and his friend who helped him through, I maybe not helped him through that, but the friend who was like constantly there through that isn't there anymore, and he's gone, and he's actually like very sad about that. And I also just think it's a symbol as well that Jarvis became Vision later on, and I like to think that he's a little bit sad to let Jarvis go, but also happy in a sense to see that Jarvis is in a sense actually real now, right? Like, because I know that Jarvis or Vision isn't entirely Jarvis, but like the fact that it is a part of him as well, I like to think that Tony Stark like likes to like feels a connection to Vision because of that, and I think that that's really nice.
Another negative point I'm going to bring to Iron Man 3, and I want your take on this. We don't really get a whole lot of Iron Man scenes, like a save the end, where obviously that's all the suits and everything. But I'd say like 90 to 95% of that movie is Tony Stark. So I mean, really a Tony Stark movie. Would you say that adds to anything? Would you like to have seen some more Iron Man clips? Or
I think personally that they meant to do that, right? So I talked about how the or maybe I didn't say this, but one of the reasons why I like the Mark 42, right? Yeah, it's kind of it doesn't work, right? Half the time it doesn't work, right? But it not working is more of a character development for Tony, right? Because a year prior, right, Steve Rogers asked the question, well, without the suit, what are you? So Tony asks, like, we get to see that. We literally get to see what is he without a suit. He's a genius, right? He was able to take down the people with guns and actual weapons in the area. He was able to take them down with like a potato gun or something. I don't even know, right? He was able to take them down with that. He made like a mini repulsor beam that he saved Harley with in one of the scenes. Like, he's a genius, right? He can do all these things. And I think that we are reminded more of Tony Stark more. And that's why I love the movie. So yeah, you're right. The scenes we don't really see much Iron Man scenes. And when we do, it's the Mark 42 like not working. Yeah, I could see why that's a negative. If you want to watch an Iron Man action film, that's not much action. But if you want to see a character development story, this is it, right? Taking away like the suit. That's like asking like, what if like Steve Rogers didn't get the serum? Or going back to one of the things you like about Thor, right, is that he has to he gets his like abilities taken away, right? Well, in Iron Man 3, he gets his suit taken away, right? It's like gone. His house is gone. The Mark 42 is like dead or like needs to be recharged. Like, it's like, what happens if you take like the main part of the superhero away? I think that's it. You get to see their true self, and I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't add more Iron Man scenes. I wouldn't add less. I wouldn't take any away. I think they did a perfect amount. I think we get to see the creative side, because I feel like with and again, that's why I don't like the nanotech suits, right? Because the nanotech suits, he can just do whatever he wants. He needs a shield, boom, there's a shield. He needs to fly faster, he can fly faster, right? But with this, it's like, if he wants a suit that can make a shield, he can make there's a suit strictly for that. If he wants a suit that can fly faster, there's a suit specifically for that. There's another suit I really like, the Mark 40 shotgun, right? Has strong repulsors, like he like backhands Killian really hard. The suit with better repulsion, right? Or the heartbreak. Like, all of these suits have different like different like special abilities, and that's why I like them. But what if you take all of that away? Then you get someone who has to think on their feet and make a makeshift repulsor that he can only use once, right? And it's gone. He has to make like a potato gun and like take down an enemy stealthily, right? I think that it's perfect. Honestly, I wouldn't change it. I don't know if you think that. That's how I think of it, at least. I think that they meant to do that, and I wouldn't change it. I think it's perfect.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Especially with the scene where he's fighting the couple people in the village. I think the one fight starts out in the bar,
Yes.
and they end up going next door or whatever to a restaurant, it looks like, or some sort of bakery.
Yeah.
And we see Tony Stark's genius kind of coming out with
Yeah.
the gasoline and the dog tags and the microwave.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
So that whole thing, and then I think what you were referencing when he kind of storms that base more or less in
Yeah, yeah.
Miami.
Like the mansion looking thing. Yep.
Exactly, exactly. So I think we really see how Iron Man can detach himself from the suits. So I'd say
Mhm.
that um, is maybe foreshadowing the end where, okay, he can live without the suits. Um, and maybe this is the start of him even realizing internally, like, okay, I may be Iron Man, but I'm not necessarily the suit, or I don't
Yeah.
need the suit as some sort of security blanket or cocoon.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that like I said, this movie gets a lot of hate, and I don't think it deserves the hate, honestly. And if you want to see an action Iron Man movie, am I going to recommend Iron Man 3? Honestly, no, not really. There's not that much action. If you want to see some real character progression, yeah, watch Iron Man 3. It's like really good, I think. And if you watch it through that mindset, it's good. Now, yes, the ending is a little bit confusing and stuff. I get that, but like the character growth is, I think it's probably one of the best character growths we've seen outside of Loki, right?
Oh
like I
yeah.
said, Loki. I'm a sucker for character growth, right? Like seeing Loki be like the bad guy, but then now he's like sitting in the eternal tree, like holding all of reality together. I think that's awesome, right? Tony Stark, like I also think it's kind of refreshing in a sense, right? Because like going back to what I said with Steve Rogers, that fight. Oh, without the suit, what are you? We get to like we're kind of reminded, like, yeah, this guy is still a genius, by the way. Like I feel like now it's like, oh, he got the suit. There we go. He's just like Iron Man now, but he's still like a genius who can like figure things out on the spot. And I think that's really underappreciated. And I think that this movie is really nice. And that bar scene, or the bar, like the start sequence of that bar scene going to like the bakery and then the water tower thing, right? That entire thing, one of my favorite parts, because it's like he's thinking on his feet, right? And I I think it's just awesome. And one detail that's not really related to anything, I like that at the funeral scene in Avengers Endgame, we do see Harley Keener at the funeral. He's that one random teenager.
Yep.
I
Yeah,
won't
yeah.
lie, I lost my mind when I saw him there. I was like, oh my gosh, they actually remembered him. I'm like, I love that. I still think that's one of my favorite moments there.
I think that's a really good point there as well. Seeing the impact that Tony Stark can have on people. Now, a lot of times he comes across as almost inapproachable.
Yep.
And I guess maybe that's the mentality we see a lot nowadays.
Hmm.
I mean, consider Elon Musk or whoever. Obviously,
Hmm.
Tony Stark is going through a lot. Maybe takes us out on people. But throughout Iron Man 3, we see some people he's had a big impact on, um,
Yep.
such as Harley, or maybe even young Tom Holland in the Square, um,
Hmm.
and the guy in the radio truck as well.
Oh yeah,
Um,
him. Yeah.
so even though there's of um, a lot of interactions that either Tony brushes off or really isn't present for, we see a lot of connections that he does form.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'd say that maybe a lot of these connections are formed in necessity. So
Yep.
obviously, we see um, Harley, that relationship being formed out of necessity, and the guy in the cable or television car. Obviously, he needs something, but still his impact is there. Still.
Necessity isn't bad as well.
Oh,
That's
right,
not like, because like technically it was necessary for Tony Stark to interact with the Avengers, right?
right.
He had to join that. That was a necessity, and that worked out pretty well. So I I think that Iron Man 3 is really underrated. I won't lie. I still think it's a movie I watch every single year on Christmas, even if I've already watched it throughout the beginning of the year, because it is at heart also a Christmas film. Um, but I like to think that, like, people say, I watched a review on it, this one guy review, and he said that, like, if you picture it as just a standalone movie, it's pretty good. I think so too. But if you watch it in the grand scheme of the MCU, I think it also offers a big impact as well. I think it's really underrated. You need to watch it not expecting action, but more of like character growth, because this is like the third movie in the franchise, or in the trilogy. And I think it really needs the credit it deserves, right? And even if like you don't like the story or whatever, like the main, like there's still some awesome scenes, like we were talking about with the thinking on foot, with like the bar scene and the bakery scene, or one for me that I really liked. I'm never gonna not watch the what's the scene called? We really need backup, and then you just see like dozens of Iron Man suits just line up. Like, you can't tell me that that's not cool. This movie still offers a ton of cool scenes, and not 7-year-old me was losing my mind when all the Iron Man suits came out. I was like sitting there like soaking it up like a sponge, and I still feel like this movie is underappreciated. And I recently have seen people changing their mind on it. I won't lie, and I think that's good, because it really is a good movie, and there's just a lot of good moments in it, right? Like that scene I was talking about, the suit up scene, there's not that much story. I mean, I guess you can make something up of it, but there's not like that big of a story. Just like, yeah, look at all the suits. But still, just seeing like all the suits, it was still just cool to see Tony Stark, or Iron Man technically, right, catch all of the people out of the air, right, and like they survived. I think that was pretty cool. And another thing that I also really like as well, I want to end off on this point. I like that with the Mark 42, we see him. There was a scene people were criticizing where him and Rodeo on the boat, and he's remote piloting the Mark 42, and that's when he saves all the people on the plane, right? And yeah, I guess it's kind of cheesy and whatever, but I like to think of it as that's the beginning of the separation between, man and hero, right? Like, he doesn't need to be in the suit now. He can be like he was in Spider-Man, what was it, Homecoming? He was in like a vacation area, right? And he was compiling this via Wi-Fi, right? I think that's a pretty cool, that like the small things he can do with he could just have the suit do, right? And I think that that's something that the beginning of that is like stemming from this movie, and like that point there, people see it as criticism. Oh, he's not actually in the suit. He's not even Iron Man. I think that that's kind of the point, that it's not supposed to be Iron Man. It's not supposed to be Tony Stark in the suit. That's like a moment, like a visualization of the separation between the two. And I think that at heart, that's what this movie is about. It's not about, fighting the Mandarin. It's about fighting inner turmoils and realizing who's in control, right? Is it Iron Man in control? Is it Tony Stark? And in the end, yeah, Tony Stark wins. And I think that's a good point, right? And I think I'm glad to see that people are liking the movie now more. Like when I'm scrolling through different social medias in the comments, people are actually like not hating on the movie as bad. And I really appreciate that, because it's a movie that I've always loved. I've loved it since the beginning. And I hope that this episode helped you change your opinions on it, and hopefully convinced you guys maybe to actually like this. But I don't know, one can only hope, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. All right, and then I guess final thing here, we can wrap up. So in terms of like a complete standalone movie, how do you think Iron Man 3 would hold up? I mean, so my first take here, we see multi-billionaire with some suits going through some anxiety. I think that's about all we know with
Mm.
Iron Man 3. He's in a relationship. He's still a bit cocky, so he's got some ego he's going to have to deal with, and obviously he's attacked by this terrorist group, and he's going to get rid of all his suits at the end. I think we'd lose some connection, at least, that he has with his suit, so maybe that wouldn't be a big deal um, in the end. I guess besides him blowing up probably at least $1 billion worth of worth of materials and whatnot,
Whatever.
right?
Whatever.
But yeah, I think a standalone movie or taking Iron Man 3 as a standalone movie isn't impossible. You could definitely jump right in and at least watch it as a movie and still enjoy it and get a lot out of it.
So I will give the haters credit. And I'm kind of on the stand of, there's very few Marvel movies where you could watch and like watch as like someone who's like, if you've never seen a Marvel movie before and you watch like a random movie, there's very few that like you would actually like, right? Movies like Thor Ragnarok, right? One of the reasons why I don't like it is it's kind of like comedic. I think that the common person would really appreciate it. Someone who's never seen a Marvel movie would like it, right? And also, I said earlier that I tie Iron Man 2 and 3 together, and that's because on their own, they kind of suck, in a sense, right? They kind of suck. Like, you see this, like, oh no, there's a poor billionaire who has all the money in the world, but has a terrible suit, and now terrorists are coming to kill him because he told them their address, blah, 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 blah. Like, on paper, it's kind of dumb, right? But so on its own, no, I don't think it would stand, right? And then like you can compare it to, again, I compared it to Thor Ragnarok, but also like Civil War, right? You don't really need to necessarily, because they tell you all the background, right? They tell you the background of like the scenes with the Hydra where he's putting or he's taking control of like the Bucky's mind, or the car accident killing, right? Like you get to see all of that. And the only thing really that we actually see in Iron Man 3, I believe, is a slight moment where actually no, there's two. There's the nightmare that where the Mark 42 comes and attacks Pepper. I say attacks, but like grabs Pepper. And then the second one is the bar scene with Rhodey, where they're at the bar and the kid comes up for an autograph. It's like, hey, can you sign it? And then he has like a panic attack and like flies out. Right, that's another moment. So there's like it's not impossible, like you were saying, but without knowing like the backstory of like the Avengers and Iron Man 2, it's definitely not as good. So I rate it, thinking about all of the movies on as a standalone movie. It's not that bad as a Christmas movie. It's pretty good. It's not the best, it's not the worst, but I think it's way better when you can watch it like when you watch it all as a trilogy. I think it's way better.
All right. Well, I think that's all for Iron Man 3. As Raph has been saying,
Mm-hmm.
I hope you enjoyed this. And if you haven't already, make sure to watch Iron Man 3. It's definitely worth a watch.
Yes, watch it.
And
Watch
we'll
all of
catch you
them.
all.
Watch Iron Man 1, 2, Avengers 1, and Iron Man 3, and tell us what you think. I'm gonna be reading the comments, so let me know.
All right. And let us know what you want to see next. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.